Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to How to Find and Get a Small Business Grant. I'm Gerri Detweiler with NAV, and I'm looking forward to talking with you today about small business grants so you can see what may be available to help your small business. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what is a grant, who makes them, what kind of COVID-19 grants might be available to your business right now if you've been struggling due to that, how to find government and private grants, a little bit about how the grant process works, and then some success tips and some resources for identifying grants that may be available to your business, as well as how to be successful when you apply and try to land one of these grants. I will take questions, so feel free to ask your questions in the questions tab, and I will do my best to get to them before the end of the presentation. So let's start by just talking about what is a grant. So a grant is funding that advances the goal of a government agency or a private organization. A grant advances the goal of a government agency or private organization. I want you to think about that for a second, because I think there's sometimes is a mindset is that I'm just going to go get a grant for whatever my business needs, rather than, hey, who's giving this grant? Why are they giving it? And why am I the right business to fulfill those needs? So we'll talk about that mind shift as we go into applying for grants in this presentation. Now, there are a few myths I want to dispel about grants. One is that it's just free or easy money, especially to start a business, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. Another misconception is that there's only grants available to certain groups of entrepreneurs. So literally in 1 week, I heard from one business owner who said, there's no grants for business owners like me. And another said, there's no grants because I'm not in that group. So there are lots of grants, and some of them may be specific to certain groups of entrepreneurs: women, veterans, minorities, historically disadvantaged entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs in a certain geographic area, rural businesses, etc. But there are lots and lots of different grants out there. So don't be limited by that one particular category that you might fall into. And again, we'll talk about this when we talk about looking for a grant. And then the third myth is finding the grant is the hardest part. Finding grants can be challenging. I'll give you some resources that I hope will make the process a little bit easier for you. But the harder part is then successfully applying. So that's sort of like trying to land a client for your business. And then you may have to fulfill certain requirements. Some grants will give the money out in stages. And so you may have to fulfill requirements before you can actually move to the next stage and get the additional funding that your business needs. All right, I do want to warn you that the government does not offer grants or free money to start a business or to cover personal expenses, despite what you may have seen online. And when you see claims about free money from the government, they are often scams. You have to be especially alert to scams right now, because in the case of at least one of the COVID grants, the EIDL grant that I'll talk about, the government is reaching out to people who have applied. And now we're seeing other business owners being targeted for potential scams due to this grant opportunity. So you have to be extremely careful about the opportunities that you see related to grants, especially if they come with a price tag. Now, I'm going to give you some resources to search for grants, and some of them do have a price tag for the search function, but it's not someone saying, hey, pay us, $1,500 and we're going to move you to the front of the line or help you get this grant. So just keep that in mind. Now, who makes grants? Well, there are several different potential sources of grants. One is private organizations. So these are companies and foundations that make grants. I work for NAV, and we offer a quarterly $10,000 small business grant. Other companies, other foundations offer grants, and we'll give you some examples and some resources for finding those in a moment. The federal government also gives out billions of dollars in grants each year. Almost every government agency that you can think of, Department of Agriculture, National Institutes of Health, Department of Justice, the national, well, I already said NIH, all of them offer some sort of grant programs. And again, like I mentioned earlier, they're trying to advance certain goals of the government in offering these grants, but there are many different grants available. I'll give you some search tools in a moment. There are also state and local government grants, and these are going to be geographically specific to your area or for a certain type of project. So it could be at the county level, the county that your business is located in. It could be at the state level. It could focus in on certain types of business grants, but those are available through state and local governments as well. So let's touch first on COVID-19 grants, and then we'll touch on some of the more widely available grants that are available on an ongoing basis to small businesses. So the most popular grant in terms of COVID-19 grants is what's called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Grant, or ADVANCE. This was created under the CARES Act, the legislation that passed March 27th of 2020, and that's the law that also put into place the Paycheck Protection, or PPP, loan program. Now, EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, that's been around for years, and it's administered through the Small Business Administration. And much like other types of disaster loans, if a business is located in a disaster area and it has been economically impacted, not physically impacted, the building hasn't been damaged, the inventory or trucks haven't been damaged, but it's the economic health of the business has been impacted in a disaster area, then businesses can apply for these low interest rate loans, 3.75% for 30 years, 2.75% for nonprofits. The CARES Act added a new component, which was a $10,000 emergency grant. So when you applied for the EIDL loan, you could check a box at the end of the application and say, I want to be considered for the $10,000 grant. And then the SBA decided to administer that grant at $1,000 per employee. So some businesses, especially those where it was one person or two people, they got pretty frustrated that they didn't get that full $10,000 grant. So with the stimulus legislation, the Economic Aid Act that passed December 27th of 2020, this was the more recent legislation, they added more funding for these grants, but they changed a little bit. So the way it works now is if you already applied for an EIDL grant before the end, December 27th of 2020, before that legislation was enacted, then you may be contacted by the SBA and invited to apply for the rest of the grant that you didn't get. So either you might have gotten, say, $2,000 because you had two employees, but you want the full $10,000, or maybe you applied later in the year and the funding had run out and there was no grant money available at all. Still loan money, but no grant money. So those entrepreneurs are invited to apply as well. What happens is the SBA emails you. You do not apply for this. This is someone who already applied for EIDL in 2020. You respond to the email that comes from SBA.gov and you are invited to apply. You have to be in a low income area and you have to have a 30% or greater economic impact. Now, we have written about this in more detail on the NAV blog, and I apologize. I realize I have a wrong link there at the bottom, but if you go to nav.com/blog and just type in targeted EIDL grant, you will see the article that goes into detail on how this program works. So the great news is if you do get the grant, it's not taxed. Until this legislation passed at the end of 2020, we didn't know that for sure, but now we know for sure it's not taxed, and you can spend the money on tax deductible expenses and still get that tax deduction. So that's a benefit as well. But it is more limited than it was in 2020. You can still apply for the EIDL loan, by the way, if you missed out before, but that will be a loan. It's not forgivable, and it is a loan that you have to repay. So there's also something called the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, and there's a number of different organizations in the sort of performing arts space, museum operators, zoos, aquariums, talent representatives, etc. They can apply for this funding. There's $15 billion available, and you have to apply at the SBA's website. So you go to sba.gov to apply for the SVO grant if you think your business might qualify. And they do have a FAQ document there that can be helpful as well. And then finally, the Paycheck Protection Program is not technically a grant, but it works like a grant because if you get one of these loans, you spend the money in the proper way, in the proper period of time, and that's even easier to do now than it was in the past. You may have it entirely forgiven. And that forgiven debt is not taxable. And just like the EIDL grant, you can spend it on expenses that are normally deductible and deduct that money. So there's both first-time PPP loans and second draw PPP loans. And they may be available to businesses that are self-employed, independent contractors, even gig workers, as well as businesses with employees. So if you haven't checked it out, I would encourage you to do so quickly. There are a lot of applications being submitted for this program, and there is a limited amount of funding. So if you go to nav.com/PPP, you can get more details on how these loans work, how to turn them into a grant by getting them forgiven, and as well as you can also apply there for your PPP loan as well. And then finally, there are state and local COVID-19 grants. So these are all over the country. And it's interesting to me watching this over the past year, around March, April, May of 2020, we saw a lot of these come up at various parts of the country. And then the funding kind of got exhausted and we didn't see a lot of it. And then there's been a resurgence. So I have seen more of these grants come up around the country recently, and I'm talking today in early 2021. So that may be something eligible or available to your small business. The one thing I would warn about is that they often go very quickly. So there's limited funding usually, and you have to apply very quickly. So you want to be ready for that. So a great way to be on top of this is to connect with your local SBA resource partner. So that could be your Small Business Development Center, SCORE, Women's Business Center. They all are working with small businesses and often alert them when these local grants come up. So go to the link at the slide, sba.gov/local-assistance, and connect with your local SBDC and SCORE at a minimum. Get on their mailing list. And then when they email you, read the email, because you may see something that pops up that could be a real benefit to your small business. Let's talk about government small business grants. Now, the federal government, as I mentioned, every major federal government agency has small business grants. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of examples here and then give you some tools to research them for yourself. One example is STEP grants, and these are grants that could help your business expand into foreign trade. Very interesting program. It's done things like help businesses translate their materials into another language or put their website in a different language. A lot of foreign trade missions and trade shows. That's, of course, happening virtually right now due to COVID, but a virtual opportunity might be there. And it includes businesses that are new to exporting. So if you have ever thought, I would love to go international with my business, I would encourage you to check out the STEP grants. Maybe it's not a fit yet, but this should be on your radar because it could provide money that could help your business achieve that goal of expanding into international trade. SBIR grants. If your business has a technology component, these grants, they're often very significant. They can be a significant amount of money, and they allow the government to sort of invest in early stage technology commercialization. And there's a couple of different versions. With STTR, you have to partner with a research institute. institution, like usually a university. They are competitive, but it can be a significant amount of money. It's very interesting if you just spend a little bit of time on the SBIR.gov website looking at some of the examples of businesses that have taken advantage of these grants. You might get some ideas for your business if you operate in any kind of technology related product or service. USDA rural development grants, these are probably not going to go directly to your business. They'll go more indirectly. So they're awarded to entities like towns, nonprofits, higher education institutes, and they in turn often will then use that money to invest in local economic development, technology development. So they might, for example, develop a training program or a resource program for entrepreneurs in the area. So you might indirectly benefit from one of these grants. And if you're involved in a local business community, this might be something you want to check out and then find a partner in your community who could apply for one of these grants that could help businesses in your local community get funding through the government, through the USDA rural development grants. So I know that seems kind of broad, and what I would encourage you to do if you think at all that you might be interested in a grant from the government, I would encourage you to spend some time at grants.gov. That's the federal government grants website. You're going to see over 1,000 government grant programs there, and you can register. So I would encourage you to register early so you're in the system. One of the things you have to do is get a DUNS number. This is the Dun & Bradstreet identifier in their commercial credit bureau system. So Dun & Bradstreet is a business credit bureau, and you get a number that identifies your business in their system. And if your business doesn't already have one, you need to request one. And sometimes it can take 10 to 30 days. So you want to do that before you see the perfect grant that's about to close on a deadline. So you sign up and go ahead and get your DUNS number. You can do that through NAV, or you can do it at the Dun & Bradstreet website. It is free. Now, if you do decide to proceed with a government grant, you're going to have to follow the directions exactly. So if it says 12-point type, you've got typeface, you have to make sure it's 12-point typeface. Like you really have to be careful, because otherwise your grant application is eliminated before you even really get considered for it. So if it's a fair amount of money, you may need to consider hiring a grant writer if that's something you don't have experience with. Especially for these larger grants, it can be well worth it. Sometimes you're talking about, hundreds or even $1 million+ dollars, and that would be well worth getting expert help to be competitive for the grant. And again, you want to be very, very careful of scams. I'm already hearing from business owners who have been approached by scammers related to the EIDL grant that I mentioned. And I think that's only going to increase. So if you, by the way, I should add, if you have applied for the EIDL grant or the loan in the past and you're hoping to take advantage of the grant, please be very, very careful. They aren't going to call you. They're going to email you, and it must come from SBA.gov. Make sure that you check that URL isn't tampered with, that it isn't, that it's correct, and that it's actually leading to the SBA before you provide any information. And again, one thing I'll just quick add, with the government grants, you spend some time there, look around, look at what is being given out, because you may find that it's not exactly what you had in mind. You think, oh, I need money for this, but you discover, oh, I could get a grant to do that, and that would increase my business or enhance my business. And so just, again, spend some time there to be a little bit creative. State and local government grants, there are other resources that I'm going to mention that you can use to try to find those. They're not going to be in the grants.gov website. All right, private small business grants. So these are given by companies or foundations. The amount and the eligibility varies dramatically. I was on one of the resources that I'm going to recommend to you just today, and looking at grants everywhere, $500, $5,000. There were grants for choreographers, grants for small businesses to help increase tourism, all kinds of different grants that were in there. So there's a lot of different possibilities here if you're open and persistent about researching the options. They're also often very flexible. So you generally will find that with these grants, you can apply yourself. You don't necessarily have to hire a grant writer. Now, I do want you to put your business at the best chance of approval. So we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. But it probably, for a $500 or $5,000 grant, you're probably not going to hire someone. You're going to apply yourself. So it's a matter of following the directions and applying very carefully. And that's the beauty of these grants. They're often a starting point for many small business owners. And just a few examples from an article that we recently updated at NAV. Barstool Fund, which has helped restaurants and some bars around the country. GoFundMe, the crowdfunding platform, has had a small business relief fund where they offer a $500 matching grant for small businesses. If your business uses ball canning jars in your business, I don't know, make candles or some kind of canned goods, you might be eligible for a grant of up to $10,000. FedEx has an annual grant of $25,000. You see, there's just a variety of different grants that if you're aware of them and put them on your radar, you might find they could be a good fit for your small business. Now, just to give you some background, sort of behind the scenes look at the grant process. I work at NAV and we do give out a quarterly $10,000 small business grant, and it's pretty easy to apply. And in a couple rounds ago, I sat on the committee that helped decide our winners. And so I was given a list of applications to review, a group of applications to review. And first of all, of course, I wanted every business to win because they were all, they were all compelling and I knew they were all someone's dream, but we did have to choose. And so what made it easier to move businesses to the finalist round was when they were very clear about how they were going to use the money. In our case, it's to solve a business challenge or to take their business to the next level. The clearer they were, the easier it was for us to say, yes, this business should advance to the next round of review. The winners ended up being Shea Better Jones, who you see here. They have a food truck in Atlanta, and they needed the $10,000 to move into like a food truck park where they had containers for like almost mini restaurants. And it was very clear this was going to, increase their capacity. This is how it was going to bring in more business. They had a very, very clear use of the funds. And that was part of why they ended up as the winner of that round of the grant. So I want you to really think about this. Think about the grant maker, the granting organization, as a potential client. How would you demonstrate to a client that your business would be the right pick for them to use for whatever it is you're trying to pitch? How would you do that to a customer? Well, you're thinking the same mentality with a small business grant. What are they trying to achieve? How can I help them make it easy to choose my business? And that will help you as you move down, or hopefully move up the selection process to get that grant. Now, let's talk about the process of a grant and then some resources as you're looking for grants. So the first thing you're going to have to do is really be on the search for grants. And this is an ongoing process. So you can use some of the resources we mentioned, where it might be a subscription service where it alerts you to new grants that meet the parameters that you have identified. It might be that you spend a little bit of time, once a week when you're watching TV, just searching and seeing what grants are out there, but you really do want to stay on top of it. And you want to make sure that you take advantage of those opportunities as they come along. Now, for government grants, I did mention if you want a federal government grant, you need to register at grants.gov. So go ahead and do that, even if you're not ready to apply now, because then you'll be in their system. And that will allow you to apply if you see one that you think is a good fit. You also want to be very cognizant of the requirements and the deadlines. Don't wait until the last minute to apply, because if you have questions, they're probably going to have a contact, but they may not be able to get back to you the day that the grant is due. And we see that at NAV where we get flooded with questions right before the deadline from applicants. The earlier you apply, the earlier you ask those questions, the more likely you are to catch someone's eye. And just think about it, at least with some grants, they might be monitoring the applications as they come in. And if you're early on, you might catch their eye and that might just stick in their mind as they go through that grant review process. So make sure you are very, very cognizant of those and you understand the requirements and follow them to a T. After the grant, you will have to fulfill requirements. And it depends how, with our grant, you just sign a, tax form, agreeing that we're giving us your tax information so we can report that. And that's it. You spend the money, it's your choice. A government grant, they might have milestones. Same with a foundation grant. They might have milestones where you have to fulfill this and then you get your next disbursement. So there might be reporting involved. And even if there isn't, just as a courtesy, sharing your win and sharing your experience of the grant can be inspiring to other entrepreneurs and also just a show of appreciation for the organization making the grant. And then finally, keep in mind that with most small business grants, you must pay taxes on them. So build that into the equation. Expect that that will be the case. Now, if you don't have to, great. In the case of EIDL and PPP that I mentioned, Congress has specifically eliminated federal taxes on those. There are a number of states that have not done so yet. And so you may have to end up paying state taxes on that income. So be prepared for that and build it into your equation in terms of how much money you need. Now, when you're thinking about applying, I want you to think broadly. And here, these questions came from Althea at GrantWatch, one of the resources that I'm going to mention, so I won't take credit for them. But she suggested you think about three different things. One is, who are you? So this is where, are you a woman-owned business? Are you a rural-based business, a veteran? Look at all those and throw those into the equation. What do you do? So what does your business do? Do you have an elevator pitch? You should have an elevator pitch. It should be a strong elevator pitch because you may have to include that in your grant proposal. You may have to have a video component, or you may have to have some sort of social media sharing. So you want to be able to clearly articulate what your business does. And that in turn may help you as you search for grants. So an example would be, you have a catering business and yes, you have a catering business that might need a grant because it's been impacted by COVID and there aren't the weddings or the other events that you normally rely on. But there might be grants out there for businesses that need to supply food to healthcare workers. In fact, that's part of the president's next round of stimulus proposals that, some of these restaurants can go to work supplying meals for essential workers and schools and other places that need that, need to be fed. So think about all those and cast a wide net as you're starting to search so you don't rule out something that might be beneficial to your business. And then who do you serve? So who's your audience? Now you do want to be specific enough that you know your audience. And this is sort of that Shark Tank position where if you go on Shark Tank and you say, my audience is everyone who, needs to eat, you're going to be shot down. They're going to shoot you down in a minute. And same thing with even a grant or marketing for your business. You have to be pretty specific, but you also want to be broad enough that you don't rule out potential grants that might be available to your small business. So once you identify grants that you might be interested, I want to give you a few tips here that will help you improve your chances of success. And I know some of it may seem kind of obvious, but I will tell you, having reviewed a lot of grant applications, that not every business does this. Sometimes they just assume this is sort of free money, and as long as I tug at the heartstrings, I'm going to get the funding that I need. But again, these grants are limited in most cases. Even EIDL and PPP, there's limited funding from Congress. You don't have to pull on heartstrings, but you do have to apply and you have to do it correctly. So you want to increase your chances for success. So one is, have a detailed business plan. If you are at the stage where you're just dreaming of starting a business and you want startup funding through a grant, you're not ready for a grant. You either have to have an established business or at least a detailed business plan to get a grant. A dream is not sufficient. And I can tell you that that's the number one question that I see on the NAV blog where we have all kinds of articles on getting grants. And it's the number one thing people say is, I want to start X business. I'm an X. How do I get a grant? That's too vague. You have to have a business plan. So I'll give you some resources for that in a moment. Perfect your elevator pitch because you will need to stand out from other applicants. Know your numbers. If you don't have a business bank account and you don't keep your bookkeeping up to date, you must do that now, because some grants you will have to at least be able to provide some financial information. And for EIDL and PPP, it's absolutely essential that you get up to date on your bookkeeping as soon as you can. Nurture your fans. We learned this in the COVID crisis. Businesses that were more resilient were ones who could connect with others who wanted to support their business. So they might have had a social media following, they might have had an email list, they had some way to reach out to those customers for gift cards or a GoFundMe campaign or something else that they wanted to do. So then one of the most important things you can do is to nurture your fan base. And then really examine the grantor's motivations. Try to read behind, why are they making this grant? What are they trying to achieve? So put yourself in their shoes for a moment so you can make it as easy as possible for them to advance your application. Follow the directions exactly and get a second opinion. If you aren't a great writer, or even if you are, get someone to review it for you. So you're putting your best foot forward when you apply. And again, don't wait till the last minute. Couple of resources there. Again, I mentioned earlier your local SBA resource partner, your Small Business Development Center or SCORE. Your mentor or advisor there can help you for free. They are paid by, SCORE mentors are volunteers. And in the case of SBDCs, our taxpayer money pays for those services, and they provide free mentoring to small business. So get a relationship going there. And then when you see that perfect grant application, say, hey, do you mind taking a look at this and giving me some feedback to see if it makes sense? All right. So where do you find grants? This is the big question. First of all, grants.gov, again, the federal website. Another service you may want to check out there. This is a subscription service, so I'm not affiliated with them, but it's just a service that may be useful to you, is grantwatch.com. It is a subscription. They do start with an $18 subscription option, at least currently. So you could start inexpensively, spend time, find out what's on there, and see if there's options for you that might be a fit. I think they also offer a free search, but it doesn't actually connect you to the grant. So I think you can just search and find out what might be available. And then if you subscribe, you can get the full details. There's another directory service called Funding Directory Online. That one's more expensive, and it's typically used by nonprofits and other organizations that regularly raise money through grants, but it does include small business grants. And your local library may have access to that directory. So another tip for you is to make friends with your librarian. I know this might be a little bit harder now with the COVID restrictions, but reach out to your library and see what research services they offer to help you find grants. Librarians love to do this. They'd love to help you with it. So take advantage of that. And they may have access, again, to this directory that's pretty useful for looking for grant opportunities. Now, what if you discover you can't get a grant for whatever reason? Well, there are potential alternatives to consider. One is financing. So that could be SBA loans, traditional loans, alternative financing, microloans in particular. If you're looking to start up a business, a microlender like a community development financial institution might be a great resource for you in terms of finding a smaller amount of money to start your business. Crowdfunding has been a real bright spot this year. There's been really a tremendous increase in crowdfunding, and it comes in a variety of forms. Rewards like Kickstarter, where you can give a product, equity-based crowdfunding, which could be a great alternative to VC or angel funding, where you raise money from the crowd using one of these SEC-approved platforms, and they actually recently raised the limit from $1.07 million to $5 million in a 12-month period. So that's an option. There's debt-based crowdfunding. So there's an example would be Kiva, KIVA.org. They are a nonprofit and they make 0% zero fee loans to small businesses up to $15,000. And it's kind of a combination of microlending and crowdfunding. You get a few backers and then they open your campaign to the entire platform for other people to support it. And the people who support the campaigns are just people who want to support small business. So kind of a cool platform to check out. And again, spend a little time there and spend a little time on some of these crowdfunding platforms to see what kinds of options are out there. I will give you a quick tip. There is a cheat sheet at crowdfundbetter.com. So crowdfundbetter.com has a free cheat sheet and it lists the different types of crowdfunding in each of the platforms for each of the types of crowdfunding. So you could then identify, hey, this is the type of crowdfunding I'm interested in, and these are the platforms. Let me go see what kinds of businesses are getting funded on them. You could consider bootstrapping or pivoting your business, finding new markets or new customers for your business. That's something that would be great for you to explore with your small business development center or SCORE mentor. But those are some alternatives if you discover that maybe a grant isn't in the works for you right now, or maybe you've decided, hey, that's too much work. I don't want to do that. And then at NAV, where I work, we help match business owners to financing. So you can apply for a free NAV account and we will match you to financing options. And as I mentioned, we also offer a quarterly $10,000 small business grant that's pretty easy to apply for. You will see a link to that in the resources tab for this presentation. So take a look at that, and we hope you consider applying and seeing where that might lead for your business. And one thing I'll add real quick is if you go through the process of applying for grants, then you have probably compiled the same type of information that you can use for crowdfunding and even for certain types of fundraising or financing. So if you want to pitch your business to your local bank, you've got this presentation that you've compiled so you can use it in multiple ways. And every grant is going to be a little bit different, but there are going to be components you're going to find are very similar. So keep a file and keep that elevator pitch, the short one, the medium one, the long one. You know, that video that you create might be used in multiple places for multiple businesses. It might be used for a crowdfunding campaign. It might be helpful to you in other aspects. So just keep in mind that what you're doing here can be a lot of work. It can be very lucrative if you get the grant your business needs, but it also can be used in different ways. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions, and if you have another question, let me know. What about a nonprofit that didn't start until October 2020? So I assume for that you mean a PPP or EIDL loan or grant, and you would not be eligible. So for PPP, your business has to have been operational by February 15th, 2020. For EIDL, you had to have applied in 2020, and you at that time the requirement was, I think it was either January 30th or 31st of 2020, you had to be operational in order to apply for that. So those two wouldn't be options. However, there might be state grants or local grants that are available for your business that was started later. So don't rule out other options, and take advantage of those resources that I shared to see what different options might be available. And then we have a question about the DUNS number. Is it free? Yes, the DUNS number is free. That's, again, provided by Dun & Bradstreet. You can get it from them. You might already have one. If your business has been around for a while, you might already have one. So you can do a free lookup to see, or if you establish a NAV account, we'll look it up for you and tell you if you have a Dun & Bradstreet credit profile, and that will have your DUNS number. It's sort of like your social security number would be to your personal credit, except in the business credit arena. And eventually the federal government's going to move to a different identifier, but right now that's the one that you're using. All right. Well, I hope you found this helpful. We do answer questions on the NAV blog. So I mentioned earlier the article nav.com/grants with an S on the end. And that article, if you have additional questions as you go through this process, feel free to ask them there. And myself or one of my colleagues will be happy to try to answer them. We really hope this helps you find and identify money for your business and that you're able to, to survive these tough times and thrive when things start getting better. Thanks, everyone.